What was her illness?
Well, she just had she had a number of issues. One was a deteriorating spine, and so her spine was deteriorating. So she was in a lot of pain,
Yeah.
even to the point where she couldn't walk anymore,
Oh.
and so she was bedridden for years. And had macular degeneracy that was taking place. In other words, she couldn't see right in front of her.
Yeah.
She was going blind. Um, so she suffered from pain, chronic pain,
Oh.
and what happened was it extended when she was a little bit younger,
Yeah.
but she was putting up a swing for her grandchildren, and the tree limb broke and she fell out of the tree and it broke her back,
Yeah.
and so from that point on her spine was always an issue.
Oh, that's terrible. Wow. How did Mr. Graham take all this? It must have been very painful for him because he wasn't too well either.
Well, he wasn't, and he loves my grandmother. He would
Yeah.
do anything in the world for her, and he loved my grandmother, and there was nothing that he could do to help her. I mean, he did anything he could to help her, but at the end of the day, there was nothing
Yeah.
that he could do or anybody else could do. And then just by chance, her feeding tube had came out, and we believed that was God's way of just saying it's time to come home.
Yeah.
And so we as a family decided, well, and my grandmother too, I think she was ready to go. She's been looking for heaven for a long time.
Yeah.
And so what was also gracious at that time was that we knew that week she was going to pass away
Mm-hmm.
because she couldn't eat her own. And so we decided, every family member got to come in and
Okay.
just say goodbye and
Oh.
love with her. And she was very loose until the day she went home.
Can you
and to
remember
be
the
the
last
lo-
thing you said to her?
No, I loved her.
Yeah.
That was very much the last thing I said.
Yeah.
But the last thing she told me was actually kind of it's somewhat funny. Is she told me and my dad as I left her room. This is probably about 4 days before she died, 4 or 5 days before she died.
Yeah.
She said, "Don't shoot my animals."
How
So,
funny.
because I'm a hunter,
Yeah.
and her place was like a sanctuary, and
Oh.
she was afraid that when she
Oh,
left,
dear.
we were going hunting.
That's great.
So she got the last word in,
Oh,
and
that's great.
so to this day, people say, "Well, that's not real spiritual." For me, it's a
was
memory that goes beyond just the words. I know what she
Yeah.
meant, and that was my grandmother. Always had wit, and
Yeah.
she's very spunky,
Yeah.
and I love my grandmother dearly.
great.
So it's really a great fitting words for a grandson like me.
Well, many people who knew Mr. Graham would feel, well, he's not going to last much longer after she passed away. But was that 2-3 years ago now?
My grandmother died in the year 2007.
Yeah.
So that's been almost 4 years ago, coming up
Wow.
on 4 years. And so we always thought my granddaddy would be dead before my grandmother,
Yeah.
because my granddaddy just lived such a hard life being on the road and everything.
Yeah.
And so we always thought that my granddaddy would go before, but when my grandmother passed away, we figured that he would probably go very soon. We see a lot of couples that die
Sure.
shortly. Perfect examples, June and Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
They died very close to each other. But my granddaddy's actually, because of his change of medicine and everything, he's gotten a new release on life. He's really wanting to. He feels God hasn't taken him home, so
Yeah.
that must mean God's got work for him to do here on earth, and he wants to
Yeah.
be busy at it.
I have a wonderful story about your granddaddy. I got invited to the Richard Nixon Library to the funeral of Pat Nixon, and then later the second funeral of Richard Nixon, where he spoke at both. And afterwards, I got to talk to Richard Nixon. I couldn't believe I was chatting to Nixon. And then we went over to your granddaddy, Mr. Graham, and I said, "Mr. Graham, that was a wonderful sermon." And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Dan," he said, "I'm trying to write my life story." What was the book called? Just As I Am. He
Just
said.
As I Am.
Yeah. And he said, "Everybody keeps dying." He said, "I'm never going to get this book finished." And I thought that was his incredible dry humor. Did you see a lot of that humor at times?
Oh, my granddaddy's a very funny man. I remember sitting with him a couple years ago back in '06. I believe it was '06. And it's when Merv Griffin died. Merv
Oh,
Griffin's a well-known man here in the United States that did some game shows and came
Yeah.
up with some special jingles. And he had a Merv Griffin show,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a late night show type thing, talk show.
Yeah.
And so when Merv Griffin died, I was up there with my granddaddy, and I asked my granddaddy, I said, Daddy Bill, did you ever know Merv Griffin?
Yeah.
He goes, oh yes, Merv Griffin. Very good friends. He's been on the show many times. I was like, really? And he was telling me a lot of things that Merv Griffin did, and some of those things I knew, some of the things I didn't know. And so I was kind of quiet. And then he said, Merv Griffin asked me to run his show for 3 days. I was like, you mean that talk show?
Yeah.
He goes, yeah. He asked me to do it. I was like, well, did you do it? And he had that look and that comment like, no. Like, that's a stupid question. No, of course I didn't. And I said, well, why not? He goes, well, I'm not funny. That was it. I mean, he just, I'm not funny. Why would I take it? Because Merv Griffin was such a humorous person. And my granddad said, well, I'm not funny. Why would I take it?
I tell you, another time when he had rock music for the first time in Cleveland, it wasn't real rock music, but it was DC Talk and Michael W. Smith. I asked him, I said, Mr. Graham, you had rock music for the first time on Saturday at the youth night. What was it like when Michael W. Smith and DC Talk came on? What did you think? He said, I don't know. He said, as soon as they came on, I switched my hearing aid off.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was very typical of him. It was a dry humor that he didn't even realize was funny.
Yeah, my grandfather did have it was a very dry humor, but he was one of the best storytellers. But his brother Melvin,
I remember him, yeah.
Melvin was the best storyteller I've ever heard of in my life, even better than most professionals.
Yeah.
His brother, and my granddaddy loved to listen to his brother Melvin tell stories, and Melvin's one of the few people that I could see that could actually take a crowd away from my granddaddy. Both of them would be sitting beside each other.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everybody starts to migrate over toward Melvin because he was such a great storyteller. Everybody wanted to listen to his stories. And so even my granddaddy's like, he would tell people, be quiet, I'm listening to Melvin. He loved his brother. He loved his sisters too, but he only had one brother, and he loved his brother Melvin.